Welcome to the Yale Center for British Arts online series, Artists in Conversation. I'm Timothy Young, curator of rare books and manuscripts at the center. I'm delighted to welcome Michael Childers to the program today. A little bit about Michael. Born in 1944 in the US, Michael is a contemporary photographer. He began to shoot portraits of his friends and took an interest in fashion and film photography. Over time, he met and photographed stars from the golden age of Hollywood, including Norma Shearer, Agnes Moorehead, and Rosalind Russell, among others. He went on to become a founding photographer for Andy Warhol's Interview magazine and also After Dark. He also produced many covers for Dance magazine and has photographed more than 200 covers for other magazines, including Elle, Esquire, GQ, Life, New York, Sunday Times Magazine, and TV Guide. Childers has also worked as a special photographer on many film projects, including Coal Miner's Daughter, Grease, Marathon Man, and The Year of Living Dangerously. In 2000, he produced the book of photographs Hollywood Voyeur, with an introduction by David Hockney. His work is held in collections worldwide, including in the Beinecke Library and the Yale Center for British Art. He now lives and works in Palm Springs, California. Welcome, Michael.
Good to see you again, Tim. So far away.
Yes, it's lovely for you to join us here virtually in this conversation about your work. We met a number of years ago when you sent a letter and said that you'd like to have some of your photographs present in Yale collections as a donation, which was wonderfully generous and also very forward-thinking in how your work finds its way into both public presentation as well as academic conversations. And I've used them in teaching before, as you know. But now we're talking about, more specifically, your work, your life, and also some pieces that are at the YCBA. So let's actually talk about how you became an artist, and an important part of that, how you got from the US to England. So enlighten us with the brief biographical timeline, please.
Well, this was in the late 60s, and I was still at UCLA, finishing up my degree there, and having luck to meet a brilliant British director, John Schlesinger, and who I became quite smitten with. And it was a glorious time in LA at that time. And I just wanted also to escape to go to swinging London somehow, because it was the capital of the world for music and fashion. And then he said the golden words one night. How would you like to come to England to work on a script, my dear boy? And I said, yes. And what was the script? It was actually, it was Midnight Cowboy. And Midnight Cowboy, and I read the script. Oh, is it a wild one? Just totally off the charts. So I said, how are you going to do this? He said, I will. I'm determined. It's going to be difficult. There's no money for it, but I'm going to get the greatest cast ever gathered for a small film and do this. And I learned so much in the working on that for 2 years about filmmaking, more than I learned at 5 years at UCLA Film School, which I'm very proud of. But still, I learned about music and about working with great set designers and photographers and art directors. And it was the magic road. It really was the magic road.
Wonderful. And we know that history has proven that that was a really wise choice for a history-changing type of movie. It won many awards, and John, of course, already had a lot of acclaim for his earlier works. And I just want to point out, and I'm going to show a first photograph here, which there is the man himself. He came from that period of the sort of new cinema in the 1960s in England. And of course, for me, the films Billy Liar and Darling are just, you know, exemplars of the aesthetic. And then when he came and did his American film with Midnight Cowboy, it started a whole new sort of era for his work. So tell us a little bit more about John and his work over the time, and also especially whenever you came into his life, and the conversations you would have with him as he was developing his cinema aesthetic.
Well, John actually, when he was still in LA,
Mhm,
he was working on two scripts. One was the writing of Midnight Cowboy, and the
mhm.
other was a long-term project called Sunday Bloody Sunday, which
Yes.
he was determined to make. It was his life story. That he always had that in his back pocket and worked on it for 2 years. But Cowboy was a hard film to get set up in LA for the thematic material, the casting is totally X rated.
Mhm.
Um, I didn't know how they did, but they're tenacious with working with a great producer, Jerome Hellman. They got to deal with the brilliant guys over at United Artists who who created so many masterpieces of the 60s.
Fantastic. Now, at what point did you, well, I could say you picked up a camera. I'm sure you probably had a camera in your hand from a young age, but at what point did you feel that this was going to become an artistic path for you to be photographing people and places and scenes?
Well, I was already in Los Angeles, an upcoming, getting to be quite well known young photographer,
Okay.
and starting to work with TV celebrities and minor rock bands, and it was exciting. Wonderful place to be. My first book jacket was with Ray Bradbury, and
Oh,
um, photographs with Lovin' Spoonful and Grateful Dead, and Chad and Jeremy. Uh,
yeah.
Oh, well, it was a wonderful time. And yes, moving on to that, the photography always was my backup and certainly stood me well. Years later, working in London with John and without John, working with Ken Tynan and Laurence Olivier.
Yeah.
Um,
Well,
Korea.
and getting onto that, I mean, so that introduced you into the very deeply into the world of British theater, and we've talked before, so if tell me if I'm getting this correct, but I think you were the first American to be invited to the National Theater to do official portraits of players.
I was, and I think to this day that I'm the only photographer who was who worked at the National Theater,
Okay,
and the only American photographer. That's what I meant to say.
right, and
And
you hit the ground
when
running.
these were for me, I'm a theater. I love theater.
Okay,
Came from back East Coast in North Carolina, Virginia. I love theater and I love New York theater, and to go to London to work at the theater there, which is mind-boggling because it
wonderful.
was at its height in the '60s with with the great playwrights that coming out then. And
And,
um,
and you hit the ground running. For example, you captured Dame Eileen Atkins at a much younger age in Vivat Regina.
And
Uh,
I did a lot of her photographs and productions for over 20 years. She loved my work.
Fantastic.
I tell you, working with a little bit with Harrell
Uh-huh.
and some of the great Hollywood photographers, I learned how to light women of a certain age,
Okay.
the great dames of the theater.
Okay.
That did me well in the National Theater. So you can like Maggie Smith, you can like Edith Evans and make her look like Raquel Welch. I mean, you can,
Wonderful. And men of a certain age, like Mr.
yeah,
Sir John Gielgud and Sir Ralph Richardson.
good, yes.
Yeah.
And Alan Bates, well, he
Yeah.
was quite young then, yes.
Exactly. Well, we're seeing him a little bit later, from a picture I think you did in the 80s or 90s, but we're still going back and forth with the people who I think first came to attention on the stage. And we're going to switch from black and white to full color with the magnificent Elaine Page. This one was actually much more recent, and we're sort of like jumping from your eras. But look at this. Was this done for a publicity piece or maybe for a magazine?
Yeah, it was done for an album cover.
Oh,
We
okay.
we actually shot it in Palm Springs in the summer with
Uh-huh.
120 degrees. It was so
Okay.
bloody hot. Elaine I adored, and
Uh-huh.
did this extraordinary cover. She looks like a mermaid, mermaid.
Yeah, yeah, it's wonderful, and it looks like so just beautifully staged, and also the way you
Well,
cast
and
the colors.
she used it as a poster, record cover all over the world. So, and
That's great.
I love my English stars. They don't,
Yeah.
they're more loyal. They don't fade away as quickly as the Americans.
Well, especially if they've been photographed by you, the photographs say evergreen. So let's go to another person who started on stage and then went to movies. Gary Oldman. This is very sort of iconic and impressive photo. Did people come to you for sessions directly, or did you get connected with them through agents or through productions at this time of your career?
Well, Gary Oldman, I was on my passionate must shoot list,
Okay.
and my good friends, the editors at English Vogue, said, "Well, we're going to make this possible. We're going to ask him to pose for
Okay.
you," and I got him, and he came to my studio in my house, and delightful. Got to spend 2 hours with him. One of the smartest, most brilliant, just magnetic young actors. Still is. He lives in Palm Springs, California now,
Mhm.
and he's a wonderful, serious art photographer. Does platinum printing and 8 by 10, all the big stuff. Most people don't know that about him,
Oh,
and
fantastic.
he's still carrying on with great roles. But
Oh,
his early work was sensational.
exactly. So in this period, when you're doing a black and white portrait, this is around 1990, I think. Were you doing all the processing yourself, and did that something that you did for most of your photography work?
Well, I had a darkroom in New York, and
Okay.
I did a lot of the theater work because there was so much post and multiple exposures for Oka Cutter and
Okay.
for the Joffrey Ballet, Astarte, and for Judith Jameson. And I was working a lot with the dance companies, and Oka Cutter was all the dance show,
Yes.
and uh, and Laura, Ken Tynan was the producer of O Calcutta, and he said, dear boy, I like the way you work. You're fast and and cheap. That's what he wanted to say. Cheap, yeah. And I understand that Schlesinger might be bringing you to London, so come and see us. Well, come and see Larry and I, and then about working at the National Theatre. I said, Larry, who? He said, Lawrence Olivier, you stupid fool. So eventually I became very close friends with Laurence Olivier and did the movie later Marathon.
Fantastic. That's great. Speaking, you mentioned this next person, Sir Alan Bates. So this is a little bit later. Is that date right? Is that 2001? He looks very good for that period.
Yeah. No, that was about that period when that was some photographs I did for Hamlet for the
Okay.
National Theatre. And it's what a gorgeous man and a solid actor and just one of the five nicest actors I ever worked with in my entire life.
Yeah. I think, I mean, in my appraisal, people don't talk as much as they should about the work he did. I think his reputation needs to be sort of revisited.
Yeah, yeah.
But here's somebody who I think whose reputation is stronger than ever. Somebody we sorely miss is Glenda Jackson. And this one was also very early, really lovely animatic shot that you did. Was this for a stage production, or was it just a general photo shoot that had been arranged?
No, Tim, I was working on um, just finished some work on Women in Love. I was photographing her for Sunday Bloody Sunday,
Oh,
and
okay.
she's tough, bright, smart, tough, and
Mm-hmm.
but again the techniques I learned in Hollywood
Mm-hmm.
came to rest. I made her look wonderful with hardly any makeup or lighting on this, just looking
Okay.
straight up the sky.
That's wonderful to think about, using the techniques to capture people in all types of roles and appearances. That leads me to sort of a bit of a more discursive question for you, is that so over the years, how did you develop your craft? Now, were you formally taught? Did you start by yourself and then learn, or did you have you already mentioned George Hurrell. So what was the combination of training, natural instinct, and formal education that gave you all these skills?
Well, I believe in developing your craft by apprenticeship, like they did in the Middle Ages.
Okay.
That's the way you learn. Going to film schools or photography schools, bankrupting your parents from the tuition. I scratch my head because I learned through working with photographers in New York, and when I worked with Sigma in Paris, I
Mhm.
worked with David Bailey in London, and some of the greatest photographers of the time. And I always would steal some of their tricks on every session and use them. So Guy Bourdin was one of my favorites. Total madman, just a great photographer.
Okay. Well, I think you can also say that you did things in homage to their style. I mean, I think
Homage. Do
the
we
best
have?
tricks
I know.
always are.
I don't know. I don't know. We have in this, but we did an homage with David Hockney
Uh-huh.
to a famous Lartigue photograph of his cousin Zezou in a raft in a pool in
Oh, yes.
1902. Somewhere we have that image, but
Okay, yeah.
um, yes, why not? Why not?
Exactly. And we're going to talk a bit more about hockey here, but how about let's talk about some famous people, some famous faces that you captured for all time, and maybe you can talk to us about some of the stories or the background and situations that brought these people into the frame of your camera. We're starting with Sir Anthony Hopkins. This looks like it might be a publicity shot.
This was on a film I worked on in Berlin called The Innocent. He hated Berlin. Just everyone was miserable on that film. And he's a very intense man, a very private man. He doesn't really love photographers, but those eyes, there's a lot of depth, emotional baggage, and maybe damage in there that
Mhm.
brings that out of him. What a superb actor! Just when I see him in recent movies, gets better and better and better.
It's a
Yeah,
lovely.
I was approachable. Some
Right.
of the great classic actors not approachable, like
Okay.
Olivia and Gilbert and Ralph Richardson
Okay.
and
This next actor, I hope he's approachable. He's one of my favorites, is Sir
uh,
Derek Jacobi. And this is an early one. And did you meet him at the National Theater?
yes, yes. Nothing but total friendship and affection for this dear man. And he could not give you enough. He's really quite young now, in his 20s at the
Uh-huh.
National Theater, where he made his fame. Um,
Okay.
sensational to work with.
Okay. And he is in a blockbuster movie as we talk. He's in Gladiator 2, which is showing around the world. So it's great that he's still giving wonderful performances. Now we're going to sort of go back and forth between the worlds of theater, movies, and music because, oh, sorry, no, actually, we are going to still stay with theater. So here's Michael York, captured in 1990. And was this also for a project, or was it a?
No. Michael, I met Michael. He was in two or three of Franco Zeffirelli's films, the Shakespearean films, and then he moved to Hollywood with his wife Pat, and they were our neighbors, and I did many pictures of Michael. It's lovely, a great face. I love that broken nose. I look at it.
That's great.
Um, and it was I can't remember what the film was here, but it's of the time in the early 90s in Hollywood.
Right. Uh, One of my
Uh,
favorites of all
my,
time
my
film,
favorite.
and I think also dear to your heart, Julie Christie.
Well, she's my baby sister. I
Uh-huh.
love her. She's the best. She's just so great. Um, and the total enigma. Is a hippie, a free spirit, sensitive, brilliant artist, actress. Um, so much to draw upon her. You know, we were actually sharing a house in Malibu here together, which John moved into, but John had to leave to go to New York to work on the script of Cowboy, and said,
Uh-huh.
you and Julie, yeah, take the house." So
Okay.
what's fun being at a Malibu house with Julie Christie? Yo, that's great at age 22. And then she started having an affair with Warren Beatty, which made
Uh-huh.
it a little bit more complicated. But that was a wham slam, grand. It was tumultuous, tumultuous. Yeah. But and she was her really close friend, seeing somebody else who I really liked, who's still a friend of mine now, called Ed Ruscha, the
Oh,
greatest,
yes.
the greatest American artist. And they were very close. And this is Julie. I said she was baking bread in the kitchen at 5 p.m. The sun was going down. The light is so good out there, Julie. Can you? I don't have time to do makeup. Just go out there. Just, I'll light you with a flash, and they look great. That's how we got the shot.
Absolutely. It's a great example of your wonderful eye and capturing the moment and having a wonderful subject to do. So, um, and here's another beautiful subject, Leslie Ann Down, which this is for a feature in British Vogue from 1980, and you knew her for quite a long time as well. Yes.
Yeah, she was an actress around London, one of the top models, and she so beautiful. My God, one of the great beauties of all time.
Uh,
And I used this technique. This is an homage to Eugen uh, Eugen Hune, and
uh,
his lighting, his look, and which I drew upon, and it was a fabulous shot in Vogue.
was this used for a cover or for an interior shot, if you can recall?
That was cover British Vogue,
Okay,
like Italian Vogue.
fabulous. Um, And now we go on to music. You're lucky to meet Sir Elton John before he was Sir in
Well,
the 1970s.
well, that's why I moved to London, Carnaby Street, and be in the music scene.
Uh-huh.
It was wild. It was red hot in London. All the great music groups were coming up. Mick Jagger and Cat Stevens, one after another. And um, I met this Cockney um, promoter called Dick James.
Mhm.
And he had a whole stable of 5 or 6 guys, all of whom became big music stars. They said, I like the way I like the way you work, kid. I like it's fresh, it's got
Mhm.
American polish. And so he got me Elton John, and the pictures turned out great. Some of the other shots I did at Elton's house, the
Hmm.
first house he ever had, and this was done in the London Times studio. I love those boots. I want those boots. I actually went out and bought one. Like,
Yeah.
um, and Elton, what a career he's had! 60 years of a genius career.
Absolutely. And this is a great photo because you're starting you're capturing him as the young man, but he's starting to have that sense of style and that bling and that trademark sort of pizzazz that he's known for. Speaking of somebody else with a lot of spirit and pizzazz, young Rod Stewart.
Well, Dick James said, I've also got this other lad from North Country, from Scotland. He's a bit peculiar looking. He, let, he looks like a cockatoo. And it turned out to be Rod Stewart, who was delightful and fun and very collaborative and brilliant. And he became Rod Stewart.
It's wonderful. No, so for example, in this shot, which was really wonderfully sort of candid, how many, like in a sitting, how many shots would you take? Do you think? How many rolls of film would you shoot?
Lots,
Lots.
lots. You can never shoot too much.
Okay.
Lots. Lots.
Okay.
It was
And
35 mil then, so it was cheap and cheerful, and get on with it.
okay. And then did you print out contact sheets and then work from them?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'd have to send them over to Wardour Street, which is a
Yeah.
music street in London, and we'd go through them. And then those days, I could actually work or talk to the art director, and that was amazing because you couldn't in LA. It was very divided departments. So
Okay.
you could create a look for an album cover, like we did with
Wonderful.
Cat Stevens,
Wonderful.
or Dusty
Oh,
Springfield, and
okay.
David Bowie.
Yeah, I know we're seeing them here. So this is David Bowie a little bit later, but it happens to be in the period of sort of his resurgence into pop music, sort of sales and fame after he did the Berlin trilogy. So was this in London or LA in 1984?
No, this was in his studio in Montreux, Switzerland.
Oh, Switzerland.
And
Okay.
Switzerland. And he it was for the movie The Falcon and the Snowman. And he was
Uh-huh.
recording the theme song called This Is Not America.
Yeah, with
And
Pat Metheny,
with
if I
Pat
recall.
Metheny.
Yes.
Yeah. What a great experience. Like working with these top of the line music geniuses. They're
Yeah,
great.
this is good. And of course, The Falcon and Snowman, directed by
John Schlesinger,
Hans
my
Schlesinger.
father.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's a,
But
it's a
John wanted to score. I played him some Metheny music. He loved it. So we started using it on the rough tracks,
okay.
which we didn't know if we could afford it for the film. But went to Mike Medavoy, the head of Orion Pictures at that time, and
Mhm.
he said, I happen to be a big fan of Pat Metheny's myself. And I thought, bingo,
That's good.
bingo.
That's the beauty
Yeah.
of externally processing and telling people what you like, and then
Yeah,
somebody knows somebody.
yeah.
That's so great.
Instead of who in the bloody hell is that?
Exactly.
And
Uh,
Metaboy backed me all the way. Said, "Look, we can't afford him. He's going to be $500,000. You've got 150,000 in your music account.
okay.
So fly to London. I'll give you the cans,
Uh,
heavy cans of the print, which was still not finished,
yeah.
and 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 go to the theater on Wardour Street and show Bowie and his managers and his people the
Yeah.
film, which we did on early Saturday morning, watching the film there. And Bowie was at the end of it was crying and just came up to me and said, hugged me and said,
Uh,
I don't care what sort of money you bloody have. I'm in. I'm in. Isn't that great?
it's
Isn't that
the
great?
proof of
And
the art. Yeah.
weeks later, we were in Switzerland recording the song at his studio.
That's great. So you already mentioned Cat Stevens, now Yusuf Islam. Was he also one of the young men in the
Yeah.
group?
He's managed by Barry Cross then,
Mhm.
and a sweet and gentle man, and I loved his music.
Mhm.
What was it was Donovan? It's sort of the Donovan sound on
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's wonderful. And one of my personal favorite, greatest people in music and whatever else of the 20th century, Miss Dusty Springfield. Um, and this was in the period whenever she was laying low and out of the limelight for a while. I think living in LA, correct?
Living in LA and drying out and
Yeah.
trying to get a normal life going.
Uh-huh.
Wonderful, sweet, tragic, a lot of darkness and unhappiness in her life. And some when she gets sober, a period of 2 years, she'll be very creative, and then she'd go back into the
Mm,
darkness of drug addiction or AA.
mhm.
But one of my favorite singers ever. I have every Dusty Springfield album ever made, and I love
I'll
her
match you
music.
one for one, as
Her music holds up really well.
yeah, exactly. Well, the good thing is that you have this late life resurgence, courtesy of another iconic music group, the Pet Shop Boys in the 1980s, and
Uh,
people, a younger generation, including people I knew her name, and so it's wonderful that she actually had a persistent up and down, but actually she rebounded, so people actually know her name. So there's Dusty. Now let's talk more about the artistic intensity of a long-term friendship you had with David Hockney. Um, and let's actually start with a photograph of him. It's a more recent one from 2002. I suppose this is when he was visiting you in Palm Springs and doing a sketch of John.
yeah, I mean, I've known David for over 60 years. One
Okay.
of the first people I met in the mid 60s in LA through Christopher Isherwood and Don McCarty,
Mhm.
and became very close. Just thought he was an extraordinary wit, and his simplicity and his art, and they're so profound, and his passion for
Mhm.
art in all forms of photography. Great photographer. So
And
this friendship continued on until a few years ago, when he moved to France. This
okay,
is, yeah, in John Schlesinger's house in Palm
okay.
Springs, where he was drawing the objet on the table during a simple luncheon there.
Now, David Hockney, of course, has this major period in his life where he leaves London, and there's that lovely film from the early '70s about him packing up and getting ready to leave to California, and then he has this long sojourn in California. But you met him when he was still working in London, so you've known him for so long, so you've seen him in many different locales, geographic as well as sort of artistic aesthetic kind of periods of his creativity,
Well, I mean, there's so many chapters to that book of creativity.
right?
These the photographs, the opera sets, the paintings, the drawings, there's many
Mm,
um, facets. Just I love this is early in the London studio, and you see him just enmeshed. And look at the colors of all that great work behind
yes.
and the paint on the floor. It was to me that was hardly any paint at all on the floor because you
Right.
go around the corner to see Francis Bacon's studio, which is a total shit house, and then there's like paint and turpentine and brushes all over the floor, sticky wicky. uh,
So David was relatively tidy.
great British artist of very different generations.
Okay.
Uh, essentially hated each other.
Oh,
Uh,
really?
and Bacon thought Hockney was nothing but a publicity hound. Well, give me a break. It takes one to know one.
Okay. Okay. That's interesting. And Hockney, I mean, not an expert, but from what I know, he's he's navigated these changes and these different phases of his work, photography and painting, lithography, printmaking, poster art. He's done it so well because it seems like it's really his call that he allows himself to do the art that he wants to do. And it all comes out looking like it's, just organically, uh, a piece of his artistic life. Um, and so I think right now there's a show up in Palm Desert or Palm Springs.
Yes, at the Palm Springs Art Museum. It's a
Okay.
huge show. Wonderful, wonderful.
If anybody were able to just quickly name a Hockney painting or a genre from the late 70s, early 80s, his pool series, his Bigger Splash series, stands out as sort of maybe a high point of his expressive um, uh, um, parsing of life in Southern California. But tell us a little bit about your um, sort of presence whenever these photographs and also paintings based on photographs were being made. Were you there at the beginning? Were you aware that he was working on a series or wanted to capture bodies in motion in pools and diving?
Well, I was there when David started working with Polaroid SX70
Okay.
collages.
Hmm.
And I would tell my friends, Greg Gorman or Herb Ritz, well, how come we haven't thought of this? We're good photographers, but Hockney's the bloody genius because it's just the way he put these together on different planes. And
Good.
you see, his mind was like a computer. He didn't just put them in a row, and they all work just great, great. And this is Ian Falconer, who was
Uh-huh.
David's assistant and lover and a brilliant illustrator and painter himself.
Is he the Ian Falconer who did the
That's,
children's books?
yeah,
Oh yeah,
he was,
he was
did,
a fantastic writer.
he covers for New Yorker magazine. Yeah.
Yes, yes, of course. Well, I'm glad we have that connection to the story. Yeah.
Uh, and yeah, wonderful, wonderful lad, and very
Okay.
talented.
Here's two more assistants, or maybe it's the same assistant or somebody else in the same swimming pool, a different
But
view.
that's Ian Falconer and David Stoltz,
David
another
Stoltz. Okay, okay,
my assistant. And I
okay.
said, David wants you in the pool naked. I said, I don't want. I said, get in the pool naked. Threw him
There he is, and this is actually something that we were
and the rest
talking
was,
about earlier is using the Polaroid, right?
yeah. You see the Polaroid in the corner, all laid out. That's how we did it. I didn't see a ruler or calibrator. I just
Huh?
uh, nothing but up here. That's how we saw it.
Okay, that's good. Now, one shot that we're not showing here is that I think you did some very early pictures of David himself in a pool. I think one where he's sort of like lounging in a like a floating chair or like a blow up chair, right? Those I think were from maybe the late 70s. So would you say that you had an influence on him for thinking about a pool series of images?
Not at all. Not at all.
Really?
David was doing pools the minute he hit Hollywood and saw that glorious color, and he was always doing pools. But
Okay.
in the mid '70s, we had a session, and I took this photograph out of a magazine of Lartigue,
Mhm.
one of my favorite turn of the century photographers. And it was Lartigue's photograph of his cousin Zezou in a pool outside of Paris in 1902. I said,
Oh, fantastic.
could would you ever consider? And he looked at it and he said, this is brand new, 12 $1,000 Yves Saint Laurent suit, and then you're asking me to go in the pool. And I said, yes, yeah, I am. He did it. It's wonderful, wonderful. His agent later said, I don't know how you did it. What a wonderful collaboration between a great artist and a photographer. And that photograph of him floating in the raft in the pool, Peter Fetterman and David's agents is the iconic image of the 20th century of David Hockney.
Okay, good. And I'm sorry, it's a tease. I'm not showing it here, but people can look that up because it's really gorgeous. And then just reassure me that not a single drop of water got on the suit. Yes.
Not exactly.
Okay, good. Yeah, it came out, so nobody or no fabrics were harmed.
Expensive dry cleaning.
Okay, wonderful. Well, we're coming to the end of our wonderful conversation, which you and I know we could talk for more hours and hours and hours about things. It's been wonderful, Michael. You always give such great insights and wonderful stories. But let's turn this to our audience and say, what would you think are important life lessons for artists when thinking about art, making art, and the long arc of how your work will affect future generations? Anything to share? Anything you'd tell somebody who is picking up the camera for the first time, perhaps?
For the first time,
Yeah.
fall in love.
Fall in love. Okay.
Fall in love, and don't quit. Don't
Then
quit.
quit. Okay.
Don't despair. And it gets better, and it gets finer, and then you find an eye, and you find your place in art.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, I would say that having known you for just a short period, but getting to know you, I think you follow that, and I think you've never fallen out of love with your artistic pursuits, with your subjects, and with this wonderful collegial group of artists and performers, musicians, and filmmakers that you built around yourself. So I extend our thanks so much for joining us, and remind people that Michael's work is in the permanent collection of the Yale Center of British Art, as well as the Beinecke Rare Book and Manuscript Library on Yale campus. And these collections are available for research and for enjoyment. Thank you, Michael, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you, Tim, and the whole staff at Yale. Love that place. Love that.
Okay. Take care.